Hello and welcome to our conversation about taking steps to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion in our places of work and communities. It is brought to you by the Greater Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Community and Social Development Department of the town of Stony Plain. Many people have questions about the legal aspects of workplace accommodations and how universal design relates to workplace accommodations. In this session, we'll unpack these further. This conversation takes place between myself, Mike, Renata, and Ada of BadaB Consulting. At the end, we'll also take a moment to tell you about our recognition badges that help you take steps and demonstrate your commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, let's get talking.
Hello again, Mike and Ada. For this conversation, we're going to talk about the law around duty to accommodate and what employers need to know. As well, we'll be talking about how to use a universal design approach as you are creating an accessible organization. So first, what are the laws surrounding accessibility and accommodations? Mike, can you share this?
Yeah. Now, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that an employer has a legal duty to take reasonable steps in policies or conditions of work to accommodate an employee's individual needs. This duty applies to all grounds of discrimination covered under the Alberta Human Rights Act. For example, race, religious belief, gender, mental disability, age, marital status, and source of income, and many others.
Thanks, Mike. So many organizations worry and wonder to what extent, and how will I know if I'm complying or if I'm not doing enough? Employers have a legal duty to take responsible steps to accommodate individual needs to the point of undue hardship. To claim undue hardship, an employer would need to show that they would experience more than a minor inconvenience. In most cases, as we talked about in our last webcast conversation, accommodations are usually simple and affordable and do not create undue hardship. Ada, can you share more about what duty to accommodate means for the employer?
Of course I can. Like you shared, Renata and Mike, duty to accommodate in employment refers to an employer's obligation to take appropriate steps to eliminate discrimination against employees and potential employees. This could be a rule, a practice, or a barrier that has a negative effect on the person who needs an accommodation. Accommodations in the workplace usually consist of the protected grounds of physical or mental disability. It may also involve the other protected grounds, including religious beliefs, marital status, pregnancy, gender, family status, and etc. Mike, do you want to share some ways employers can accommodate employees or potential employees?
Sure, Ada. So for example, employers might accommodate job pieces, such as equipment or tools or aids for their jobs, the job duties, and other tasks. They might accommodate work matters, such as the general environment or the flexible work schedules where people are doing their jobs. And they might accommodate rest and recovery periods, such as allowing more time for recuperation or offering rehabilitation and return to work programs. For every situation, it's important to remember that it should be handled and assessed on an individual basis and in consultation with the employees.
Thanks, Mike. And employees also have a responsibility, such as informing the employer about their need for an accommodation in writing if there is no accommodation process in place at the organization. They should also include information such as whether the illness or injury is permanent or temporary. They would want to explain why the accommodation is required, for example, because of a disability or a pregnancy, family status, or religious belief. They would want to provide any medical information on what restrictions and limitations they would need. For example, information on, for instance, an employee not being able to lift more than 20 pounds for the next 3 months. Suggest appropriate accommodation measures and cooperate and accept reasonable accommodation is another thing they'll want to be able to do. They'll want to indicate how long the accommodation will be required and advise the employer when it is no longer required or when it needs adapting or updating. Mike, as we discuss workplace accessibility and employers' duty to accommodate, can you explain how the universal design approach is used in creating accessible workplaces?
Yeah, sure, Renata. Now, the definition of universal design is the design and composition of an environment so it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. An environment or any building, product, or service in that environment should be designed to meet the needs of all people who wish to use it. Now, that's the definition. And some values of universal design are that access is a matter of social justice, that disability is a social construct resulting from the inability of environments, be they social, physical, or other, to accommodate individual differences, and that good design means that a product, process, or environment is to the great extent possible usable by all. Now, the universal design approach means accessible for all. But what does that mean in practice? Ada, I know you have some examples.
I do. I have many examples, but let's just share a few here. First of all, use simple and plain terms when speak and write. Second, keep your hallways and offices clear of barriers. Third, ensure that there is an exclusive washroom for staff and visitors. Fourth, assign a buddy to help coworkers who have barriers in health and safety drills and evacuations. And fifth, last but not least, large print instructions for emergency and safety equipment.
Thanks, Ada. An important principle of the universal design model is flexibility. Universal design supports more inclusive, productive, and of course, accessible workplaces, and increases workplace well-being and engagement. Ada, anything to add to that?
Yes, lastly, just remember that accessibility and the universal design approach in the workplace also includes physical accessibility, such as ramps, systematic accessibility, such as policies and flexibilities in the shift hours, leadership accessibility competency, and also work culture accessibility, such as an employee well-being program or a resource group.
Hey, this has been a great discussion. But to wrap us up, let's talk about two simple things you can do right now to get started. Number one, refer to the Alberta Human Rights Act or your prevailing legislation to learn more about what your responsibilities are to accommodate employees. And number two, create an accommodations process. This ensures that employees understand your organization is safe and an equitable workplace. That was a pretty good conversation. As we wrap up the session, I'd like to take just a minute to let you know that we offer a badge recognition program that is focused on supporting organizations in the early stages of action on equity, diversity, and inclusion. There are 6 badges available: leadership and capacity, accessibility, staffing, compensation, performance excellence, and learning. For each, we have a list of research-based practical indicators, and you tell us how your organization is fulfilling several of them. Then, we have a confirmation meeting and award the badge. There's lots of flexibility built in, and the point is to inform and recognize your first steps on the journey of meaningful equity, diversity, and inclusion. Contact information for Ada, Renata, and myself are on screen. Please reach out to any of us or the corporate office to talk more about equity, diversity, and inclusion and how we can help you. And thanks to our partners, the Greater Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce and Community and Social Development Department of the town of Stony Plain, who are advocates of equity, diversity, and inclusion.